Have you ever called a woman confused? Have you ever caught yourself thinking that she changes her mood out of nowhere? That she feels too much? That she speaks in riddles? Well, maybe the problem isn't with her. Maybe what you call complicated. Just be a woman trying to be sacred in a world that taught her to be silent. Rumi, the poet of the soul, wrote something that most men ignore to this day. The feminine soul only reveals itself to those who surrender to the invisible. But how many men actually give themselves over? How many look beyond the body, the speech, the gesture, and see the invisible where the woman hides? The spiritual truth that Rumi left us is not light. She bothers, because it forces us to admit that we failed, that we try to love with the mind while love lives in the soul. Do you feel like you've already lost a woman who seemed to have an entire universe within her? Maybe you felt she was too intense, but what you called intensity was actually presence. The spiritual woman feels the world within. She senses when she is not being felt, and she leaves, even though she still loves, because her soul asks for the truth. Rumi said, "Women are the mirror of creation. To deny them is to deny oneself." And what do we do today? We try to understand them logically. We want them to explain everything, that they are predictable, linear, clear as water. But the feminine is not a straight line. It's a curve, it's a tide, it's a moon. It is silence, chaos, and healing. And maybe that's why so many men get lost, because they seek to understand the sacred feminine with their eyes, when they should listen to him with their hearts. Have you ever loved a woman who seemed to carry a mystery impossible to decipher? Have you ever felt like she wanted something more? Something you didn't know how to name or offer? That's not your weakness. This is a calling, called to look within, to stop trying to conquer with force, and start playing with presence. The feminine soul is not an equation. She is a temple, and only those who leave their ego outside can enter. But what most men never understand is that she doesn't want to be understood. She wants to be welcomed. Don't want quick answers. He wants you to stay, even if you don't understand. Rumi wrote, "Close your eyes. Fall in love with the sound of what she doesn't say, because what she feels is far beyond words. It is in the space between one look and the other. It's in the pause before crying. It's in the way she withdraws, when she realizes her soul hasn't been seen. And do you know what happens when she feels that? She starts to disappear, not physically, but spiritually. It stops shining, laughing with your whole body, to trust, not because he stopped loving, but because she got tired of being touched by the surface, while his soul screamed for depth. And that's when many say, she changed. It got cold. It became distant. But the truth is brutal. She just protected herself, because her soul realized that his gaze no longer saw it as a temple but as a task. And you, man, if you're hearing this now, it's no coincidence. Do you feel like there's something in it that you haven't accessed yet? Do you feel that no matter how hard you try, there is something invisible missing between you? Maybe this video is your calling. The moment you stop wanting answers and begins to open up to questions that come from the soul. Because Rumi also said, your task is not to seek love, but only to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. And perhaps the biggest barrier between you and deep love be the fear of diving into the feminine like someone entering an ocean without a map. But the truth is about to be revealed, a truth that can forever change the way you see, feel, and touch a woman. And before we continue, I need to ask you something important. If these words touched something inside you, if in any way it seems like this video is describing what you experienced or felt, comment below. I want to learn to love with my soul. Because this simple act is not just a comment, it's a choice. It is a silent ritual of awakening. And if you feel like you need to dive even deeper, that this conversation is just beginning, leave your like now. This is not about ego or vanity. It is so that this message reaches those who need to hear it most. Men who still think that love is understanding, when in fact, it is feeling. And if you haven't signed up yet, do it now. Because the next few minutes, I'm going to show you what no one ever told you about women and about your own soul. The journey is just beginning. Have you ever felt that no matter how much you give, no one truly sees you? As if your presence is seen, but your essence ignored. as if what you offer from the heart is constantly reduced to empty gestures, misinterpreted, disconnected from what you truly feel. This doesn't happen only to you. This is a silent pain that crosses thousands of souls every day. The feeling of trying to be seen but constantly forgotten in the invisible. And this pain doesn't scream. It accumulates in silences, in glances that give up, in hugs that no longer warm, in words that were never spoken but should have been felt. Maybe your heart is tired of explaining itself to someone who never wanted to listen with their soul. Maybe you've tried to show your best self with words, actions, promises, and still it was as if you spoke a language no one understood. And when you love someone who only sees the surface, it's as if your every offering is misinterpreted, not because you love wrongly, but because the other person listens with their ears, when they should listen with their heart. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And perhaps that's what life has been doing to you, breaking it little by little, not to destroy you, but to show you where the truth of your soul lies. Most men have never learned to see with the eyes of the spirit. They've never been taught to delve into a woman's emotional and symbolic world. They try to decipher the feminine as if it were a logical code, when in fact, the feminine is sacred territory, and sacredness cannot be deciphered. Sacredness is felt. What hurts a woman isn't what you say, it's what you don't feel. It's the absence of your true presence. It's that moment when she talks about something that touched her deeply, and you respond with a shallow comment. It's when she opens up in vulnerability, and you rush to resolve it. It's when she longs to be welcomed, and you offer solutions. You don't realize it, but with every miscalculated gesture she feels, "He's not with me," not out of malice, but out of disconnection. And this, for the female soul, hurts more than any direct rejection, because she doesn't want a man who always gets it right. She wants a man who is truly present, a man who, even without understanding everything, remains, a man who looks into her eyes as if he sees an entire universe, who recognizes in her the dance of the invisible, who respects her intuition, her silence, her gentle strength. But we live in a world where men have been trained to contain, to silence, to control. They've been taught that emotion is weakness, that crying is a sign of imbalance, that drowning in pain is dangerous. And so thousands grow up disconnected from their own hearts, trying to love without having learned to feel, trying to conquer without knowing how to surrender, trying to be strong, when in truth, all they needed was to be true. Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings, why do you prefer to crawl through life?" And this phrase seems tailored to the modern man, because he drags himself along in shallow relationships, superficial conversations, emotional games that only feed his ego, while his soul craves depth. He wants love but doesn't know how to surrender. He wants to be accepted but doesn't want to show himself. He wants to be understood, but is afraid to reveal himself. That's where the invisible problem arises. It's not that you don't love, it's that you've learned to love with reason, to measure feelings, to measure words, to hide pain, and deep down, you think you're protecting yourself. But what you're doing is building walls where there should be bridges. And these walls, which you build out of fear, end up pushing away the very people who could truly touch you. A woman feels this. She feels it when you distance yourself even when you're right next to her. She feels it when you respond automatically, when your embrace is there but your soul is far away. And believe me, the body can lie. The soul never does. That's why she pulls away. Not because she stopped loving, but because she realized that, even though she offered you everything, you weren't felt. And when a woman doesn't feel felt, she leaves in ways you don't even notice. First, she becomes silent. Then, she stops asking. She doesn't complain. She doesn't wait. And when you finally realize, it's too late, she's already gone inside. She's already withdrawn her soul. She's already closed the temple. So if you still have someone like this by your side, listen to this with an open mind. Perhaps you're facing a sacred soul but still trying to decipher it with the wrong tools. Perhaps you're trying to win it over, when what it craves is connection. Maybe what's missing isn't more effort, but more listening. It's not more logic, it's more presence. And if this touched you, comment below. I want to be presence, not absence. This phrase, more than words, can be a new beginning. Because when we name what we feel, the soul begins to awaken. and only those who are ready to feel deeply awaken. Perhaps until now you've begun to realize something that's never been clearly stated. It's not that you love little or that you love wrongly. It's that you learn to love with your mind. They tried to teach you that love is about control, that it's achieved with strength, that it's maintained with reason. But love, true love, the one Rumi wrote about in his most profound poems, is surrender. And surrender only happens when the ego is silenced, when the soul finally begins to listen. The root of this disconnect between men and women isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. And you need to hear this with all your presence. Because this truth isn't told in books, nor in shallow conversations about relationships. The female soul is made of cycles, silence, and sensitivity. But we live in a world that values control, noise, and logic. A world that celebrates speed, performance, and explanation. And all of this runs counter to the rhythm of a woman's soul. Rumi said, "The feminine is the soul of the world. To deny its dance is to deny one's own light." And yet, that's what we've been doing. We've been denying the feminine in women, but also within ourselves, because every human being carries within them both the masculine and the feminine. But many men repress this intuitive, sensitive, receptive side for fear of appearing weak, for fear of touching a part of themselves that is soft yet powerful. And what happens when we deny the feminine? We lose our way to the sacred. We lose access to the invisible. We begin to live as if everything had to be explained, rationalized, proven. But what truly matters cannot be measured with words. It can only be felt, lived, witnessed. That's why you may have been with a wonderful, sensitive, intense woman and still not been able to reach her, because you tried to connect with her using logic when she needed presence. Because you tried to shield her from pain with advice, when she needed you to hold it with her in silence. Because you tried to make her explain what she felt, when all she wanted was for you to notice, feel, and listen with your soul. This is where many men go wrong. They don't understand that loving a woman spiritually isn't about deciphering her, but about dancing with her to the rhythm of the soul. The problem isn't that men don't love, it's that they try to love without shedding their ego. And the ego wants to be right. It wants to be in control. It wants to have guarantees. But love offers no guarantees. Love demands risk, courage, vulnerability. And yes, it's scary, because by stripping away your ego, you also expose yourself. You also reveal your own wounds. You also allow her to see the whole you, and not just the strong, confident, ready part. But that's exactly what creates true connection, because the feminine soul doesn't seek perfection. It seeks authentic presence. It seeks someone who doesn't run from what they feel. Someone who stays, even when everything seems confusing. Rumi wrote, "Close your eyes and feel. That's where true seeing begins." This phrase is an invitation, a call, a reminder that to truly see a woman, you need to close the eyes of your ego and open the eyes of your soul. You need to silence judgment, haste, and the urge to settle, and simply be. Be. Maybe you've never stopped to think about it, but the feminine doesn't want to be conquered. It wants to be revered. It doesn't want to be dominated, it wants to be embraced. The feminine is water, it is flow, it is mystery. And mystery cannot be dominated. Mystery is honored, it is respected, it is loved, with humility. And if you resist this, you'll keep repeating the same patterns. You'll keep connecting with women who seem incredible at first, but who later seem distant. You'll keep telling them they've changed, that they've closed themselves off, that they've pulled away, without realizing they're just reacting to your disconnection. Because when a man tries to love with his ego, he may be kind, physically present, polite, but he lacks soul, he lacks listening, he lacks immersion. And here's the hardest part to admit. Most men have never truly immersed themselves. They've never allowed themselves to sink into a woman's soul without rushing to understand, without wanting to control. And that's why so many loves end without explanation. Because the woman leaves, and the man says, "But I did everything for her." And maybe he did, but he did it with his body, with his logic, with his behavior, not with his soul. The female soul recognizes when you're fully there, when you're not just saying pretty words, but feeling them, when you're not just present, but available. And this to her is worth more than any external gesture. This is what makes her open up, what makes her trust, what makes her surrender her very essence. It takes courage to love a woman with your soul. because she will show you parts of yourself you're afraid to look at. She will mirror your wounds. She will challenge you to let go of control. She will pull you into silence. And there, without formulas, without defenses, without masks, you will discover that you also have a feminine within you begging to be healed. And when you heal this part, everything changes. You begin to feel women differently. You begin to listen to them beyond words. You begin to notice the invisible signs, the subtle gestures, the silences loaded with meaning. You begin to love with your body, yes, but especially with your soul. If this excerpt spoke to you, write here in the comments. I choose to love without ego. Not because it will make you perfect, but because it's the first step to seeing the invisible that you've so often ignored. Let's continue. What no one told you is that, to love a woman with your soul, you must die before you die. Not a physical death, of course, but a death of the ego, of the character, of the man who lives only to keep up appearances, who moves in the world with emotional armor, who reacts with fear whenever something invites him to go deeper. This death is silent but transformative. It's the death of the defenses you've built to protect yourself from pain. It's the end of the illusion that control keeps you safe. It's the beginning of something Rumi called radical surrender, the one in which the heart opens with no guarantee of return, simply by recognizing in the other a soul that also beats. Rumi said, "Put aside your head and dive in with your heart. Only then will she recognize you as truth." The key to accessing the feminine is not understanding but surrendering. And this surrender for many men seems frightening, because we've been conditioned to believe that giving in is losing, that showing emotion is weakness, that feeling too much is a sign of loss. But the truth is different. When a man decides to abandon this mindset and begins to love with his soul, he becomes invincible in what matters, not because he never makes mistakes, but because his presence heals. He doesn't arrive to fix a woman. He arrives to feel with her, to hold her shadows firmly and without judgment, to be there, even when he doesn't know what to say. This is why so many women give up trying to explain themselves, because they've realized they're not being listened to with their hearts. They're analyzed, diagnosed, compared. The love they expect isn't a technical love, full of emotional strategies and games of conquest. It's a raw, whole, imperfect, but true love. A love that's born when a man steps out of his head and onto the sacred ground of the soul. A man who, instead of seeking control, offers presence. Who, instead of ready-made answers, offers welcoming silence. Who doesn't try to dominate her, but allows himself to be touched by her. A woman doesn't want a perfect man. She wants a man present, truly present, not just physically present by her side. She wants a man who sees when the sparkle in her eyes dims, who notices when her laughter is forced, who senses when her touch is no longer as full of surrender, not because she's stopped loving, but because she's begun to doubt whether she's being felt. Presence is that forgotten art of placing yourself fully before someone, of stopping the world for a few moments to truly see the other, of not being caught up in 1,000 thoughts while she vents, of not responding out of obligation but listening because he wants to understand, even if he doesn't know how. The hidden key is this: the feminine opens when it feels it can exist fully, without having to prune itself to be accepted. A woman doesn't surrender to those who analyze her. She surrenders to those who feel her. And to feel, a man needs to strip himself bare. He needs to let go of his pride, his automatic responses, his ideas about what it means to be a man. He needs to recognize that within him also lives a denied feminine side, a sensitive, intuitive, receptive side that has been silenced for years. And it is when he reconciles with this part of himself that he begins to truly understand the feminine universe before him. This internal reconciliation isn't easy. It requires moving through painful memories, facing fears you've learned to ignore, experiencing old anger, unprocessed abandonment, and vulnerabilities you've learned to mask with force. But that's precisely where transformation happens, because the man who refuses to feel also refuses to love fully, and the man who dares to look within begins to see the woman not as a mystery to be unraveled, but as a soul yearning to be recognized. Rumi said, "You don't need to seek love. You just need to remove everything you've built within yourself to prevent it." And this phrase carries the secret within itself. The hidden key isn't a technique. It's not an emotional trick. It's a return to essence. It's unlearning everything you've been taught about relationships and starting from a purer place, the truth of your soul. Because a woman senses when you're in that place. She senses when you're not trying to win her over, but simply being with her. When you don't try to convince but touch. When you don't close yourself off, but allow her to see who you are, including your weaknesses. You don't have to be a flawless man. You just have to be a man who doesn't shy away from himself, who knows there's power in feeling, who understands that her silence carries messages, who realizes that her body speaks, but it's her soul that screams. A man who doesn't try to mold her to his liking, but contemplates her as if before a living, pulsating, divine work. This kind of presence transforms everything. She feels, she relaxes, she trusts, because finally someone sees her not as a role, wife, lover, girlfriend, but as a soul. And that's where she opens up, not with her body, but with her spirit. She begins to dance within, to expand, to heal, because true presence is healing. And there's nothing more spiritual than two beings who, stripped of masks, can simply be with each other. If this touched some part of you that was already trying to wake up, write in the comments, I strip myself of my ego to love with my soul. This decision isn't just about one woman. It's about you, about your healing, about how you choose to exist from now on. Perhaps you loved an incredible woman, one of those who arrives as if she already lives somewhere in your soul, who doesn't need to make an effort to enchant you, because her charm isn't in what she shows but in what she awakens in you. A woman who looked at you as if she saw what you didn't even know existed within you, who spoke calmly, but carried storms in her eyes, who seemed too strong for the world and at the same time too delicate to be understood. Maybe she was by your side for days, weeks, months, years. Maybe she loved you deeply. Maybe she waited for you. But still, she left. And what hurts you to this day isn't the departure, it's the doubt it left behind, the silence that echoed afterward, the feeling that you lost something sacred without understanding exactly where you went wrong. Because from your perspective, you did everything right. You were there. You helped. You tried to soothe her pain. You tried to cheer her up. You tried to be strong for both of you. But she still distanced herself. She slowly withered, retreating into silences, withdrawing from the easy laughter, the deep conversation, the spontaneous touch. And at some point, she simply wasn't there anymore. Even if she still slept beside you, perhaps deep down, you feel that it wasn't what you did that drove this woman away. It was what you couldn't feel. Because she didn't want a man who would solve her conflicts like equations. She wanted someone who could stand being with her, even when she didn't know what she felt. She wanted you to realize that her silence was a scream, that her irritation was just soul weariness, that her distance was a plea. See me, feel me, hear me. And you tried. You tried with logic, with advice, with quick solutions. You tried to tell her everything would be okay, when all she needed to hear was that it was understandable that she wasn't okay. You tried to distract her, when all she needed was a hug without explanation. You tried to bring light, when what she was asking for was someone willing to stay with her in the darkness, not to pull her out, but to show her she wasn't alone. Before, you tried to fix her. Later, perhaps you understood, too late, that she just needed to be felt. Because the feminine doesn't seek fixes. She seeks space to be, to move between phases, between intensities, between light and shadow, without being judged, without being rushed, without being silenced. The feminine surrenders itself to those who have the courage to witness their truth even when it's uncomfortable. The woman you lost may have retreated because she realized your presence was there, but your soul wasn't. And that doesn't make you a bad man. It makes you a man who was never taught to love deeply, who never learned that listening is more than hearing, that feeling is more than reacting, that being with someone is more than occupying a physical space. You grew up in a world that taught you to win, to conquer, to be strong, but no one taught you that true strength lies in emotionally bearing yourself, that the most powerful presence is one that doesn't need to understand everything, but is willing to walk through the chaos with someone. Maybe today you're remembering a scene, her last conversation, her last look, her last gesture, and maybe now everything is making more sense. Maybe you realize that in that moment what she needed wasn't an answer. It was your listening silence. It was your open heart even without knowing what to do. It was your vulnerability rather than your armor. You didn't lose this woman because you didn't love her. You lost her because she didn't feel loved with all her soul, because you offered everything except what she needed most, to be felt. And the most painful thing of all is that she tried to show you, with words, with gestures, with subtle distancing, but you didn't understand, because no one ever told you that the feminine speaks in codes that only the soul can translate. And now perhaps missing her will be accompanied by a new kind of pain, no longer the pain of abandonment, but the pain of awakening, the pain of realizing you could have done things differently if you had known, the pain of having loved someone intensely, but in a way that didn't achieve what they needed most. This pain isn't punishment. It's an opportunity. It's the beginning of a new path, because now you know. Now you feel. You begin to realize that true love isn't about giving everything you have. It's about giving what the other person truly needs. And this is only possible when you're willing to step outside yourself and immerse yourself in the other person's universe with humility. When you understand that every gesture, every lack of words, every silence carries an emotional truth that deserves to be embraced, and that often it doesn't want you to say anything. It just wants you to remain firm, feeling, present. The woman you lost may never return, but perhaps she was the portal that led you to this moment, the moment you begin to transform, not to be better for her, but to be truer to yourself, to be a man who listens with his heart, who touches with intention, who looks with presence, a man who doesn't run from the invisible but learns to inhabit it. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of you already knows this process is inevitable, that you can no longer return to the old way of loving, that you can no longer pretend you don't feel, that you can no longer remain asleep in a relationship, waiting for the other person to shake you. Now it's you who awakens. Now it's you who chooses the new path. If this moment in history resonated with what you've experienced, write in the comments. Now I listen with my soul, because this phrase marks the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Let's move on. You don't need to understand a woman logically. You need to embrace her with your soul. And perhaps this is the most liberating and at the same time most challenging point for any man ready to cross the invisible line between superficial love and true love. Most men spend their lives trying to understand the feminine, like someone trying to piece together an emotional puzzle with pieces that don't fit. But the feminine isn't a riddle to be solved. The feminine is a living presence, a state of mind that only reveals itself when it feels spiritually secure enough to flourish. A woman doesn't want to be explained. She wants to be heard in her entirety. She wants to be felt in her cycles, respected in her silences, welcomed in her complexity. Because for the feminine, depth isn't an option. It's a necessity. What she wants isn't for you to understand every nuance of what she experiences internally. It's for you to be the space where she can express herself without needing to justify herself. What she asks for isn't a solution, it's emotional grounding. It's true presence. Rumi said, "Be like a candle, burn from within to illuminate the other." And perhaps this is the most powerful image of what it means to love with spiritual maturity. You must be willing to ignite within yourself something that doesn't burn with anger, fear, or haste, but that burns with lucidity, surrender, and tenderness. The man who chooses to be a candle accepts that his light is not noisy, but steady. He understands that it will often be necessary to illuminate a woman's pain with silence, that it will often be impossible to fix her, but it is possible to warm her with presence. A shift in consciousness happens when you stop expecting a woman to function like you, when you stop thinking she's exaggerating, or being dramatic, or acting illogically, and you begin to realize that her every gesture, even if confusing at first glance, is an attempt to be seen more deeply. Feminine communication is symbolic. She won't always clearly express her feelings, but she will leave signs, small gestures, subtle changes in voice, a more distant look, a shorter hug. And you, instead of reacting impatiently, learn to read these languages with an awakened heart, because when you stop trying to decipher it, it begins to reveal itself. It begins to reveal parts of itself that were hidden behind emotional defenses. It begins to trust that it can surrender itself completely, because it knows there's someone there who isn't in a hurry to leave when things get tough. And this kind of revelation doesn't happen immediately. It's a process, a spiritual dance, a silent ritual of emotional openness that requires constancy, respect, and courage. Perhaps you've already noticed that there's a different beauty in a woman who feels emotionally secure. She shines differently. She speaks with a different vibration. She walks with more ease. Because when the feminine soul is embraced, it expands, it heals. And more than that, it heals those around it. Because a woman who feels felt trusts again. She dreams again. She loves again from a truer place. And the man who loves her with his soul also changes. Because in this process of allowing her to reveal herself, he begins to reveal himself too. He begins to realize that his role was never to control or protect from everything. His role was to be a mirror and a foundation. It was to be someone who also accepts vulnerability, someone who acknowledges their flaws without shame, who doesn't seek perfection, but wholeness. And this wholeness arises when you recognize that love isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to continue even without them. The spiritual consciousness of the awakened masculine is simple, yet profound. It exchanges judgment for listening, reason for sensitivity, haste for presence. And it is from this awareness that you begin to realize that true love is not a feeling that appears ready-made. It is cultivated. It is built in the details, in the daily choices to stay when it would be easier to run away, to listen when it would be easier to argue, to feel when it would be easier to rationalize. A woman doesn't need you to save her. She needs you to be there. You need to create a space where she can be her soul, where she doesn't need to ask to be felt, where she can surrender herself without fear of not being understood. And when this happens, something rare manifests. She begins to look at you with a different kind of love, a love that is no longer needy. It's admiration, a love that doesn't demand, but inspires, that doesn't hold, but liberates, that doesn't weigh, but nourishes. This is the silent transformation of those who love with spiritual maturity, of those who understand that love doesn't need to make noise to be true, that the deep connection between two souls doesn't happen in shouting, it happens in shared silence. This is the shift in consciousness, realizing that the feminine doesn't need explanations, it needs space, and the space you offer begins within you. It's your calm that heals. It's your listening that liberates. It's your surrender that reveals within her the courage to show herself completely. If you felt this change happening inside you while listening to these words, write in the comments, "I am the space where the feminine can flourish." Because this is more than a phrase, it's a silent declaration that you're ready to be presence, ground, and mirror. Let's continue. If you've made it this far, it wasn't by chance. It means something within you is awakening, that your soul is ready to feel more, to love more truly, to reconnect with what truly matters. And if this video spoke to your feelings, then you're already part of something bigger. Here, the soul also has a voice. Here, every word is a mirror, every silence is an invitation, every story is a chance for healing. Therefore, I invite you now, with an open heart, to subscribe to the channel, not just as someone who follows content, but as someone who decides to walk alongside those who feel the same way you do. Turn on notifications to continue receiving messages that touch, heal, and transform. Leave a like if this content touched you, because it shows that you're saying yes to your own healing journey. And now, watch the next video that's appearing here on the screen. It's the continuation of this conversation, the next page on this path we're walking together. It will make even more sense after everything you've experienced here. See you there.